you did, if you didn't, we talked about if you didn't, she wouldn't get it. You could.
This is our third meeting this week. We have one more to go tomorrow night.
I have one on Friday night.
Oh, that's right too.
Gonna talk trash.
Actually, I enjoyed being on that committee.
I did too.
I always felt like we got something done.
Are you saying we don't get things done?
No, I've been on a lot. I didn't say that, but it just seems like it was very tangible. How are you doing?
Well, how are you doing?
Pretty good. I love work.
Okay, okay.
Do you expect many people to join you?
November.
And John.
Time.
And if you happen to see someone just.
Okay.
Say, hey, let's.
I didn't know.
Anyone text me,
Yeah.
I will. Thanks for the having.
Yeah.
I've been telling her I don't need to go to the hospital. I don't need to go to the hospital.
You want to pass me on something?
Arguing with her. And actually, I got pretty.
Okay. Oh my gosh.
She finally called the doctor now. She's gonna do the surgery. I said, no matter what you're gonna do, get it here. And probably the same amount of time that are.
Oh, stubborn were you?
Yeah, a little stuff.
Yeah, that really.
Now, I hate never been there. Go to the hospital.
Yeah.
I more than where you. I didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah, the spectrum box. But I told him, yeah, but I said I would pass the message. Oh, did he come in here? No, he came into the library. Yes, but I mean, when did you get your message?
No, I talked to him
Today.
today.
I did.
Yeah. You were there? I hadn't had a chance for the hours.
We got home around all the time.
I did.
By about 6 o'clock. I was like,
Yeah, I wanted to make sure I took that in. Did they know you were in there in the library?
pain. Yeah. And he says, oh, it's your pendant.
Oh, good.
And I was been there about a year and a half.
And,
Good.
But when we came in, we did that.
Go ahead and show you don't have time.
Yeah, I got that. Okay.
Oh, but you wanted to mention it again, that's a little.
Yeah.
I redid it using that original number.
Yeah, he said, oh, the phones up there get all stacked.
It is more, but it's less. To do it, it's better to do
We're talking about the fiber.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it's not real encouraging. Over here, the same problem there.
But I think it's something to be done.
I will.
Yes, a baby last night. Yeah. Did you know the name?
He said he would be here, you know, hopefully.
He told me he was coming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was coming.
He has been very discreet, he has not.
Sometimes he's just slips in right at the last,
Yeah, but it's like, I think they have been nesting.
We're gonna- I
with the
can-
babies,
Yeah,
And.
Rebecca may need assistance. Rebecca may need assistance at any moment.
Yes.
Well.
Yeah.
So I redid it, senior year, another 50,000 in homestead. reimbursement. Right now.
Is one of your sons in Boston?
Well, well, except that we forecast our homestead exemption.
In South Carolina.
So that comes off.
It's your daughter.
That's all right.
I have
Yeah.
to think about being.
So I don't know how to do the.
Well, I'll send you that word.
No, I was heard.
Later, I'm sure. We can bang this around tomorrow. Yes, but you're right, I mean, that's really.
Well, I am.
Not really, but.
But we need to have it settled,
Yes.
because we normally have, they know.
Says Ed Modell is doing, but I don't see him.
So, is our, we're over here, there's Christmas.
No.
So, what we need to do, we probably
Oh, they must, they're probably doing.
Everything, they're okay.
That
We
meeting
have,
is
right, so, Anna, yeah, I don't know.
she's not in Massachusetts, more.
They haven't come in yet.
Okay, so who was that?
Here we go, and
Marshall. Well, the Selectboard meeting trumps the library meeting.
And it was on the agenda, on the bottom of the.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you have a quorum? Yes, we do.
To the committee, but not to Beverly.
Hands on.
Yeah, so there's
Oh.
4 of us.
But I didn't show it, it is confusing.
So you have four.
Yeah, we have 4. We have a live. And Dave is on it. I just, Dave happens to have one.
Right.
Yes. Boy. Well, that quieted everybody down.
Oh, we got 2 minutes.
No, but it takes
I know.
this process.
All right, I'm sending Beverly and Ed the link.
Okay, thank you, Penny. I'll walk on.
I can let Beverly know. Ed is using the wrong link. I just emailed him the correct one, if you want to let him know that.
Oh,
Check his email.
okay. Thank you.
The salary. There's no one else that the word is that wrong. We have to.
I'm surprised you can tell that it's coming on. Yes, the one that's not.
Oh, I got an email saying that you want.
I can't remember. Bob.
That's the reason.
Oh, okay, couldn't read it.
Oh.
Two more minutes.
2 more minutes? No, it's fine.
I mean, I hate to start and then they walk in, you gotta start all over. again.
No, it's just introduction.
Well, that's
To go to meetings. You can go ahead to the meeting.
Good
Yeah, 'cause we got a couple of adjustments and stuff. That's an
I don't
idea.
go to the office anymore.
I agree with that.
Karen Statler.
We can reopen her, let's do that, do our adjustment and then get that rock on.
Okay.
Well, I just want to fuse all your meeting going, and then we use the fuse that makes sense. Okay, I'm gonna call, we have two meetings here tonight. So I'm gonna call the select board to order. Are there adjustments to the agenda? I have one. Are there others? Okay, the one adjustment I have is I would, at the end of this proceeding, the select board is, I'd like to have our select board meeting and discuss a legal matter with our attorney. I anticipate it will be in executive session. And since you items you need to take care of as well in public, we can recess to the front office, the three of us, and Terry and Kristen. So there's one adjustment there. Are there any public comments? Select board for items not on the agenda? Seeing none. I'll turn it over to
Okay,
you.
all right,
Call
so-
your committee to order. I think we're missing a couple folks. right? Oh,
This off. And I have hearing problems, as most of you know, so talking loud and slow is very good for me. I'll try to adjust though as best I can. So we're gonna call the Library Community Center Facility Committee to order. And I'd like to know if there's any adjustments to the agenda from our group. Yes, Maura.
It's that the date for the minutes is March 2nd.
Right.
Oh,
Under number 4, the March 7th is the wrong date, March 2nd is the correct date. We'll be doing our business at the end of our meeting with Kristen. Are there any public comments for items not on the agenda? Okay.
So we want to do introduction?
Yeah, I thought maybe, I've never met Kristen, so I'm really happy to meet you. And I thought maybe we'd just go around and say our names. And you can just say you're on the community center. Marsha, are you willing to take minutes? Thank you. Would you like an agenda to follow?
I have.
Okay. Thank you very much, Marsha. Okay. I'm Sandy Wiseman. I'm one of the co-chairs of the South Thomaston Library Community Center Facility Committee. I hope our other co-chair will show up soon. He's just had a baby boy, so we'll congratulate him.
Today?
Last week,
Oh,
maybe the week before.
when you said just, I
Well-
meant like an hour ago.
Well, you never know what day it is
Yeah.
when the babies are little. Okay.
Warren Paddock, I'm a member of the Library South Thomaston Community Center Committee, and I'm also on the budget committee for the town of South Thomaston.
I'm Marcia Turner. I'm also on the committee.
Maureen Spencer, I'm also on the committee.
Penny Alley on the Library Community Center Facility Committee, and I'm the director of the South Thomaston Library.
Terry Baines, Town Administrator. Kristen Collins, Town Attorney.
Walter Wrights. Select board. Jeff Northgrove, select board.
John Spear, select board, chair of the select board. Why don't we also have the public
Yeah.
also introduce themselves?
We have another.
You have a committee member.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm
Zoom.
sorry.
Me
Yeah.
And
and just library and community center. Is there any way of increasing the outgoing volume? I can hardly hear you.
That's interesting. We
Yeah,
heard you
yeah.
loud and clear.
Here.
I talked to Jeff about it today, and he said the volume button on that is for us to hear. That's why we're hearing everyone so loud. He said if there's a problem with people hearing, it's probably on their end.
okay, so unless you can adjust your volume, I don't think there's anything we can do here. We
Okay,
can try-
I've done mine. I'm gonna drop out and try another device. So I'm gonna be out and then a little later back in.
And we'll try to encourage people to speak up.
Okay, either way, don't worry about it. Let me just jump out here and see if coming back in works better. You guys go ahead.
This and that, this and that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have another committee member just
Yes,
watching.
Dave, you
so-
want to introduce yourself?
Everyone, Dave Thomas, I'm co-chair of the Library Community Center Facility Committee, also on the planning board here in South Thomaston. An architect. That's what I know how to do.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
hello, everyone.
Congratulations.
Yes.
Thank you.
Happy birthday to Rowan.
Much appreciated.
So,
How about if those in the audience say their name?
Sandra Wallace, member of the community, on the Conservation Commission, and I'm on the Budget Committee. Barbara Wright.
Carl Rockwell, I was on the original GPS. Kathleen Benton, I'm a citizen of the town.
if folks could speak up.
Please.
Move on.
Yeah, those on Zoom, would you like to introduce yourself? Sally first, maybe?
Sally Merchant, just listening in.
Ed,
Yep, Ed Modell.
Betsy?
Yes, Betsy, just listening in and going to stop mute again.
I can't read up. Others of you that I can't read your name?
That's Bob Sarabian.
Oh, yeah, Bob and Betty Jane Sarabian, interesting bystanders. Trying to hear you guys. Thank you.
So can I say a few words?
Yeah, and then do we want to just mention the paperwork that we passed out? Or do you want to do that when you?
Have you, okay, where, I don't know where that is.
Well,
There was a file right there.
Yeah, she got it.
so-
Well, this is the agenda. Oh, wait,
Well,
you have,
attached.
okay, so you also have, in those handouts, the future planning and fundraising, so this is from the Guilford Butler Futures Committee, a recommendation. And John has nicely highlighted, just to show you that the Library and Community Facility Committee consider creating an associate nonprofit corporation which would seek tax exemption status under section 501(c)(3 of the IRS code. The other. Hoping the other.
Sandy, yell louder. Yell louder.
Louder.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. The other page is from last year's town warrant, town meeting, Article 10, to see if the town will direct the select board at the recommendation of the Guilford Butler Futures Committee to create the Library and Community Center Facility Committee to plan and fundraise for the construction of a new building consisting of approximately 500 square feet to house a town-owned library and community center. And then there was an amendment to the article that read, notwithstanding the Futures Committee recommendation, this shall not be construed as preventing the Facility Committee from reevaluating possible renovation of the existing building if the committee finds renovation advisable due to changing circumstances. So that was passed. Our committee was formed, and this is for you, Kristen, I think we were in November, and we received our mission, our charter from the select board, which reads, the overall and long-term mission of this committee is to plan and fundraise for the construction of a new building consisting of approximately 4,500 square feet to a town-owned library and community. This committee will have two primary goals: raise money for the initial designs, followed by the funding for the final designs and construction. And number two, work with professionals to create initial designs and cost estimates, followed by final design and construction oversight. So this is our mission, and a lot has changed since November. People's minds may have changed a little bit. I don't know. But I would first like to ask, and for Kristen to say, select board, is this the mission? Is this the mission as you now understand it?
is, as far as I'm concerned, we haven't had a discussion to the contrary, and not only, I think it's what the town voted on. But, yeah,
Yeah, I agree. Nothing has changed as far as the mission.
And I would like to ask our committee members in particular, because a lot has changed, are you all still committed of fundraising and building a new building? Well, definitely.
No.
No.
Yes.
Yeah, right? I am, but. I have
Yes.
like- Thank you, Anne. Yeah. Yes, for now. Penny, you want to state your?
I'm here because I'm concerned that the library will be designed by people that aren't using the library. And
That the library will be, I'm sorry.
that the library will be planned and designed by a committee that doesn't use our current library. And I'm here just to make sure you understand what our library needs. But no, I do not support building a new building.
And by the way, the library, the internet library looks great. I think, it's really an amazing feat that you've done. So
Thank you.
Thank you for that. So my thought was to turn this over to see what Kristen's remarks would be about a 501c3. What I understand is our mission is to build a building. It's not a friend of group that is supporting, if it was a friends of group, then we would be supporting the management and the staff of the library, which we can do, but that the mission is really for building. And so I don't know how that changes things in terms of establishing a nonprofit and then going for 501c3 status. So I would think that the mission of a 501c3 or a nonprofit would be the same as the mission that we have right now in our committee. And that's a question that I have for you. And so I would hear from you a little bit about your understanding of where you are right now.
One question to start with, though, that I don't necessarily have a grasp of, which is the library currently, how it's run and managed. Is it a department of the town? Is it okay?
We are a municipal department funded at town meeting, had budget committee last night to approve the upcoming budget.
but I should think we should let Kristen know there's been a major change in that the library was housed in a very small, I can't see you, in a very small town-owned building. It is now moved to Butler School, which still sits on this property, and just a week ago, 2 weeks ago, opened officially. And that was
No,
part,
we're not official yet.
well, whatever. And that was part of the recommendations contained in here, that in the 4 to 5-year interim to plan and fundraise, temporary library, in moving to the Guilford Butler, and that has happened.
Got it.
Maybe not officially.
Still a couple of things to complete before our.
But you're open, you're open.
Yes. Mahjong will proceed on Friday now that we have the ramp in place.
In the community room. Where the table-
Correct.
Yeah, it's a great community room. Our committee last month, and at the beginning of April, heard from Liz Jenkins, who had been the president of the area interfaith outreach food pantry in Rock. And she was the president of that board. And she gave us, I thought, a terrific presentation about her process, and then some real questions for us, which we haven't dived into yet. But the main takeaway from her presentation was alignment, that we all need to be aligned on the committee, with the select board, with the mission, and I should think with the 501c3. That's why I asked everybody about, their commitment. So I understand, I don't want to run this, just talk at the mouth here, but I understand what the process is of establishing a 501c3, what the order of things is in terms of incorporating, and then, a nomination process for a board of directors, and then a meeting, bylaws, getting bylaws together, and then in the end, going for the 501c3, which takes a little bit of time. So we're not necessarily in a big hurry, but I would like to hear what your comments about and where the difficulties are that might beset us.
Sure. I mean, I think maybe the place to start is not necessarily with the 501c3 itself, but what a town can do absent a 501c3, because it's certainly not mandated in this case that there be a 501c3. So a town obviously can own this building, it does. A town can fundraise, a town can accept donations, a town can spend donations for whatever purpose town meeting might authorize those donations to be accepted and spent for. And a town can certainly appoint a committee such as yourself to oversee that process, the allocation of the funds, the building of the building, the management of the building. So absent a 501c3, I think it's fair to say that a town can legally do everything that this corporation would do. So it's important to be a little bit circumspect about that. The thing that a 501c3 can do that a town cannot do is govern itself, is have access to a slightly broader range of funding or a slightly different range of funding, which is not to say that it's necessarily more funding overall than a town on its own can access, because towns can access certain pots of money that a 501c3 cannot. But the town can also raise money independently, grants, taxation, and everything else, and convey that money to the corporation, which then gets pooled with any private money the corporation is able to raise too. So that would be the sole reason to have the corporation as far as I'm concerned, but I'm happy to hear what anybody else thinks about why that would be the direction. Your thought.
I don't know what that is. I was the chair of before I was on the select board, or when I wasn't on the select, after and before. The committee that produced this report, and we discussed this, and there's a couple other people that were on that committee as well. Jeff, Sandy, Merle in the audience. Yeah, Penny, right? Yeah. And we discussed that at length, and I think our thought was just what you mentioned, that we wanted to consider a nonprofit corporation with 503 status to help fundraise, because it, as you say, could potentially access funds that the town couldn't. So I think the feeling was that if we could, both the town and the nonprofit could act in concert and broaden the potential funding sources. And I think that was, in my mind, that was the major reason that we included in the report, that the creation of the nonprofits that would seek 501(c)(3) status should be considered. My concern is, though, is that I want to make sure that if that corporation is created, that it somehow, the governance structure is set up in a way that, as you say, the nonprofit can govern itself. And I want to make sure that it stays true to the mission and doesn't all of a sudden veer off and which it can do, and I don't know, turn into a food pantry. I mean,
Walter?
and that's my concern.
Yeah, Walter.
So if we were to incorporate a public benefit corporation, having 501c3 status and have a governance document approved by the town, which is exactly what we did with the 3-town transfer station cooperative that we have. Would that satisfy the ability to reach funding sources that are not available to the town, but also have a governance document that the select board is, empowered to enforce?
Yes, so I think there are two structures that I've kind of mulled over. The one would be 2 silos. You've got the town who would be in charge of the project itself, and there could be a committee and everything else. And then you could have, as a separate silo, something that would function a lot like you might know of fire department auxiliary to function. Their job is to raise money. That's basically it. And the town understands that that entity is going to raise money and contribute funds that it raises. And it probably exists for this sole purpose. And there's not a lot of interrelation between the management of the project and the fundraising. So that would be structure number 1, and pretty simple. I think this committee would be formed on its own just to raise money, and its mission would be to raise money for this purpose and convey all funds raised to the town for the support of this building.
And would that be a nonprofit?
It would be a 501c3.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's option 1, and then option 2 would be structured like this. I think the town would adopt an ordinance that establishes this corporation and empowers it to adopt bylaws, but gives parameters on what those bylaws have to say. And the corporation is going to be comprised of some number of trustees or board members who run it. The bylaws will dictate whatever that structure is, but some number, if not all of the trustees, are going to be appointed by the select board. So that there's that interrelation of control between the town and the organization. So that's the real distinction between option A and option B, is there's this interface between select board or town and the organization. So it's basically an arm of the town and not a separate silo.
I've read different things, so I don't have an answer for this. Can a select board member, I know the public benefit corporation, is that the public benefit corporation that Walter is talking about, is the transfer station that runs between 4 towns, 3 towns. And other things that I've read, and that's a 501c3, and other things I've read say that select board government employees cannot be on the board of a 501c3 because of conflict of interest. So that's a question that I have. How do you resolve that?
In this case, first of all, I don't think it's going to be employees that are going to be seated on that board. It would be appointees of the select board, or it could be, there's something specifying that the people on the board will be this official, that official, and 3 appointees by the select board. It could be structured however you want, but I don't think that that's a conflict of interest between the two. It reminds me a lot of, that transfer station is established, I believe, through an interlocal agreement, right? And the interlocal agreement is adopted by town meeting, and it sort of stands in the place of the ordinance that I'm talking about. I'm sure, although it's been years since I've looked at it, outlines what the corporation looks like, how the board is formed, etc. And then those people go forth, form the corporation, and it's structured in the same way it's outlined in the agreement. So,
One of the incorporators is sitting right next to me.
there you go.
Well, actually, I reincorporated it. It existed before I got it.
And in the first case, that with the 2 silos, the project group that's just working on the building of the building, that is a totally separate committee? Is that what you're saying?
I think that, the town could structure that part of the responsibilities however it wants. It could give some, I mean, you know, the town in this case is not creating that entity per se. So the town isn't vesting that entity with any authority. But it could be an informal situation where while there is a town committee who's in charge of this, the fundraising group does have some input.
Have you got any questions at this point?
I guess, just if the town incorporates, produces an ordinance that incorporates the 501c3, like, I guess, the thing that I'm not sure about is, and this is more particular in terms of how it works, but like, the accountability of like reporting back and forth between the board of the 501c3 organization and the select board, and like, other than controlling the structure of the bylaws through the ordinance, like how does that accountability structure work between the operations of the organization and operation of the town?
And I think that's going to be in the bylaws as well as the ordinance. Again, very similar to lots of interlocal agreements. It's just going to say that the board of the nonprofit corporation shall report to the select board every X date, or if it has, you know, members of the select board who are on the board, then those people would be tasked with being sort of the liaison and reporting back.
Yeah, go ahead, Maureen. Can't hear their head down.
So our committee, are you suggesting that the fundraising part of it be a separate committee from ours?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the idea is to carry the mission forward.
So we'd be on that, so we could do both jobs, is what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, this committee at present is established by, well, actually, did the warrant form it, or did the town meeting form the committee? It did, right? Sort of. It gave the select board the mandate to form it. So the question is whether there could even be any change without a change to the town meeting. And actually, I think we'd want to take it back to the town if we were going to make any real changes to what this committee looks like or what the role is. So I think it's kind of up to the board and everyone in the room to talk about, you know, is there going to be some material change to the membership and makeup and mission? But it could be, you know, this committee could be in charge of anything from fundraising alone all the way up to and including planning for and managing the facility.
So we have two jobs then.
You'd have whatever jobs the committee, you know, the corporation is given the authority over. Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't believe that this committee's mission is ever to manage the facility.
I mean, manage the project.
Okay.
Yeah.
We need to be very specific about this.
Words matter.
I mean, it could, I don't see any reason why it couldn't be part of that committee's mission or responsibility, but I understand that what we're talking about here is a building project that's kind of, you know, long-term. So I'm not even that focused on management of the facility once built right now.
Yeah, but that's an issue though. That
Sure.
We need to deal with it. It's a politics of a small pig. if you
Well,
will.
so what,
To recognize the elephant in the room, so to speak.
Sean, can I say something?
Well, it's kind of Sandy's running, but go ahead.
Go ahead, Merle, and then I want to say.
I'm really confused here and concerned. I heard a tally taken of people that were in support of the mission of this committee, where people didn't agree. So you don't have any committee with people who don't agree.
Well, we don't have everybody aligned, is absolutely.
Then why are we even talking about all that other
Well-
stuff until you get people who agree on something?
Merle, when we appointed them, everybody agreed.
So how do you manage that, John?
I'm not
People don't
voting.
agree.
Hold on. When we created this committee, we actually asked people if they supported the mission. Some people said they didn't. We didn't support them. To my recollection, everybody said they supported the mission. Now, that doesn't mean people can't change their mind.
But does that mean you
That,
mold
and
it?
that doesn't
you
mean
mold
just
it
because,
to-
that doesn't mean because one person or two change their mind that the committee dissolves automatically.
No, it doesn't, but I don't understand how you can go forward if you don't have agreement on what is supporting the mission. don't
Well, I
understand
think
that.
that's one of the reasons we're meeting tonight too. I mean, I think that's an ancillary piece of this, but.
So,
Mary's got her hand up.
oh, yeah, wait a minute.
Well, the first time we met and went around the committee, we had one person that said that they didn't want to build a new building when we originally sat at our very first meeting. Because I
Well,
wrote
that
notes.
was not the case when we appointed.
I'm just reporting, because we went around and everybody, and so that was, we started off that way.
This had quite a while.
I'm gonna call on that. Who had?
Well, Marcia, I'm sorry.
I'm the one that said no, and I think what I'm saying is I'm not prioritizing a new building. I think we also need to look into the cost of renovation of the building that we have, and which would make the most sense.
Can I, yeah. Our intention is for you not to look into the cost comparison between the two. That's not what we're asking you to do.
And I'm not talking about cost, I'm talking about feasibility of use.
Here's what we want you to do. This is the task we have given this committee. Plan for and fund a new building. If you reach a roadblock in 5 years that says we're never going to get there, then start thinking about other alternatives. But at the outset, at the beginning, out of the gate, you shouldn't even be thinking about anything but building a new building.
I mean, that's what 7 of us spent a year and a half of our lives doing. And you want to revisit it.
And that's what our charter to you was. Two goals: fund and design a new building. So if you can't get on board with that, my personal opinion is that you would come back to the select board and say that you did not want to be on the committee.
So a couple things. Marcia's been honest from the beginning. I've been trying to incorporate her into, really thinking differently about it, but I think she's still being very honest. And we're now talking about a really aligned mission. I think that, again, that was the message that we all heard from Liz, right? That we have to, if we don't get aligned right now, we can't go any further, which is to Merle's point, I think. So, our committee will be meeting in another few weeks, and that will be the subject of our committee meeting to align, but we cannot have, and actually on a board of directors, you have to agree to be in line with the mission and to carry the mission forward, to not do anything illegal. There is a code for board members of a 501c3. So that, I don't want to get to that place and not have us aligned. So that's why we started the commission, because it's hugely important. There are 253 public libraries in the state of Maine, and more than two thirds have 501c3s. Most of them are friends of, were formed at some point, whether it was when the library first came into being, as in Lincolnville, which is not owned by the town, and others have been owned by the town, and even Cushing has its 501c3 now to support the projects and the direction that the head librarian wants for her library. So, I understand how Friends of works pretty well. Some of us were animal friends of the committee in another town, in another state. But I don't really know how this works, and that's what I'm trying to clarify for us now.
So other larger towns, for instance, I represent the town of Wyndham. They have the Wyndham Economic Development Corporation. And that corporation exists to do things just like this. To hold property while it's being developed, to make development related decisions, and mostly to fundraise and have, broaden the town's ability to raise money for projects. And so I think this is the same construct. Lots of towns in the state have these. It's just for a sole purpose instead of, a larger, broader purpose. So it's certainly not an unusual thing to do. I was gonna say that, in terms of the committee makeup, if there is an ordinance formed corporation, then that ordinance is going to basically direct the select board to reestablish a committee or however we're gonna structure it. I think that's a moment when that ordinance is enacted, that there's probably a break in the committee, and it may be a lot of the same people who end up on the board, but this committee is not going to directly become the board of the new corporation. So that will be the clearinghouse of making sure that everyone who's going to be appointed is in support of the project.
I don't necessarily see this committee going away if a nonprofit 501c3 corporation is committed. I mean, is created. I think this committee's mission is broader than what that corporation would be, at least in my vision. I view that corporation to be basically a vehicle to raise funds, not to design and plan the library and the community center, for lack of a better word. That's how I see it anyways. I really would feel it. I liked your vision that you laid out in 2 because it alleviated my concern that the corporation wouldn't sort of, once it was created, just sort of, corporation can go where they want to go. And if there is no limiting parameters, for example, which the ordinance could create. And I think that, I guess I don't see why this committee would have to go away, so to speak, because of that. And maybe I didn't hear you right, but.
No, I mean, actually, I think it's sort of a fundamental question that we should probably talk about for a while is, do we envision this corporation having more than a fundraising responsibility?
I don't think that was the if you go back to the recommendations.
No, it's in none of the, it's not in our mission, and it's not in the recommendation of the Guilford Butler Futures Committee.
Oh, I thought it was.
So, I mean, part of the charge of this committee is to plan for,
Right, but yes, okay, we agree.
But not to manage.
not to manage, but
Not to manage.
the mission of this committee is to plan for the project.
Yeah.
And what I was hearing at the beginning of this meeting is the intention is to carry that mission into the corporation. So if that's the case, that corporation would be sort of in charge of the project. But it doesn't have to be.
That wasn't what I envisioned or
Okay.
heard.
Yeah, I agree with John. My vision is that if we have a 501c3, that its sole purpose is to fundraise for the building.
So that ends up being more like your scenario
Number one,
as
right.
opposed to scenario number 2.
And I should say that scenario number
I didn't
one.
hear you, Gabe, but
Oh, I just said that's much more similar to the first scenario that Kristen outlined, where there's the town committee that's making the executive decisions and then an auxiliary organization whose sole purpose is to raise funds. Than it is to the second
Right.
scenario, which would be a more holistic corporation and that's created by the town to do the whole thing.
Which is not to say that in option 1, which is my fire department auxiliary example, there couldn't be an ordinance that, creates some sort of representation between the two. Certainly that ordinance would give the authority for the town to accept any funds raised by that auxiliary and use them for this purpose. And then create some sort of interface between that corporation and this committee that we're meeting with right now that would sort of, work on direction of the fundraising and messaging and PR and all that stuff.
so I'm unclear how an ordinance works, like, it's not something I know.
It would be adopted by town meeting, written by the
So
select
board
board.
brought it up,
Right.
you guys brought it up, and then it'd be adopted at town meeting.
Or not.
Or not. Or not. Yeah, all right.
So I'm no tax expert, and my only slight hesitation with this, if it's purely for fundraising, is whether we can seed it with, members of the board, for instance, or whether we can mandate that that corporation give money over exclusively to the town. And I think that's all fine, but I would just want to check with one of my tax partners about that. I don't see, I just, I'm gonna look at the way some of the development corporations are structured and try to emulate that.
Yes, Walter?
So also ask if a 501c3 dissolves, and in this case, it would dissolve if it can't make the number that we're looking for. Then my read is that the funds that it raises must be donated to a like not-for-profit. So in one of your scenarios, can we make that go away? And, but 501c3 is a tax code, so how can you make it go away? I mean, it's.
No, you can't make it go away, but the question is, can the bylaws of that corporation mandate that the money go to the town to be used for the same mission as the nonprofit? And I don't see why it couldn't.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, one of the 501c3s that I was associated with, when they dissolved, the Attorney General required that anything left over went to the town. That was a requirement of the dissolution. So when we dissolved, we had to turn everything over to the town.
And I was involved in one today, dissolving, and we have to spend all the money because we're not associated with the town or a project. So we can't be left with any money. We could donate it to the University of Maine for scholarship or something, but we have to do that. We can't keep an account going.
So Walter, your question is, are you thinking of donors? People who might give, especially big donors? And that we don't succeed in 5 years, what happens to those donations? And is it better to donate to the town directly rather than to the 501c3?
Well, but according to the research that you've done, that closes off several, more than one avenue of donation. So, and when I donate to a not-for-profit, I do that with my eyes wide open. I happen to be involved in one that's every year we breathe a sigh of relief that we're still alive. So we know every donor knows when they give money that they're not donating to an everlasting entity. So I think most donors will run that through their brains. And then in our particular case, because the town has its account that was set up where it says that you can get your money back, then that's an avenue.
I have a question.
Yes, Catherine.
What happens in the case where the donation is contingent, or is specified for the purpose? And in the end of for instance, donating to the greening of the building or the efficient energy systems. And in the end, it doesn't happen, can that money be returned to the donor?
I don't see why not, as long as it's been accepted with that stipulation, right? It's going to be earmarked. So one interesting thing is nobody is saying that the nonprofit would necessarily have to sit on all of the money it raises over a 5-year period. So it could be, part of the mandate of the corporation that it pays over to the town every June 30th, what it raised for the prior year.
Right.
Then the town holds that in its capital account so that there's not this worry about what happens on dissolution. Or, God forbid, the risk would be the committee or the nonprofit board goes in a totally different direction in terms of the fundraising and starts holding the money hostage or wanting to use it in a different way, right?
Wow.
The fundraising arm doesn't like what the planning arm is doing and withholds the money. So I think there should be some sort of regular transaction here between the two, if it's not monthly accounting.
Well, that comes back to the governance structure too, which is kind of my fear from the beginning, that, that once a nonprofit is created without those limitations, it can go where it wants to go.
Well, it has to follow the mission.
Well, we can change the mission. Nonprofits can migrate.
But it also means you establish the bylaws and make the governance, and you have to have the accounting process in place to make all those rules.
And it's plenty, yeah.
And like any nonprofit, I've been board president for many nonprofits. You have a structure, and if you go against it, you're in a lot of trouble. So it starts with making sure the bylaws are what you want.
And the process of how those bylaws are amended.
Right. So just to kind of recap a little bit, so in the first scenario with the two silos, there's a potential for a nonprofit in silo to raise the money. In the second structure of adopting an ordinance and making a public benefit corp, that is also a 501c3. So that would also have a board and all the same things that apply. Okay. And then the third thing you talked about is the EDC Development Corp. Are you suggesting that that's enough?
No, not at all. I'm just using that by way of example of, a structure that has worked well for lots and lots of towns. That has maybe a good deal more interface between nonprofit and town than we might be envisioning.
Thomaston has one.
Yeah, that's right, they do.
Development Corp. Is that, well, so does St. George. CDC they have. Other questions? So Jeff.
Yeah, so now I'm blurred now on the difference between the two.
Well, it's funny you said that, because I was gonna say we've sort of melded them all together, and that's fine because we're getting a direction. But I think that when I made the distinction, I was really thinking more about there's this, with the silos, there's this entity who's just gonna raise money, and it's gonna pay that money over to the town, and there's not gonna be a lot of interface between the two. If any group could go out right now and say, we're forming a 501c3 to support the Guilford Butler Library project. And they could independently have bylaws that say this money is going to get paid over to the town. Where it morphs more into option 2 is the town creates that entity. The town dictates, in some respect, the management, the bylaws, and the accounting of that entity. And that now looks a little bit more like an economic development corporation.
I see.
With that distinction, I lean now towards option 2. And it could be that it's strictly for raising money for the project, but I think the town and should be involved in the membership, appointment, membership, and oversight of it. Some control over the bylaws.
So in the case of AIO, there was an already existing nonprofit, which had been raising money over many years until they, outgrew their building, and they, in the process of saying, are we really going to build a new building? They formed another committee. Liz Jenkins was the president of the 501c3, and she became it wasn't really a president, but there was a group, there was a building group, architects, people with good database, all the kinds of skill sets you want in a board, like in a 50, I would think in this kind of a 501c3 for building, that you're looking for people with skill sets, not just nice people, but hopefully they're nice. But you need certain things to happen in a board of this kind of project. So I'm going to go with your number 2. Would that be? Is that how we could make that happen? So we make sure there's somebody that's really good at numbers and finances and databases, which I would call the treasurer in a 501c3 board. And then they would have a committee under them, which could be people from this current committee, as well as, you know, whoever else is needed. Is that,
Right, yeah.
is that how? it works?
So corporation's going to have, at minimum, a president and a treasurer
And a secretary.
and a secretary. And those people could be members of the board or not, depending on how we structure it. And I would think for a corporation like this, we'd have 6 board members. One person's the president, one's the treasurer, you know, whatever. I'm throwing 6 out there, but it's, you know, there's gonna be some number in addition to the directors of the corporation. And the directors would be president, secretary, treasurer. I mean, just brainstorming this a little bit, and maybe more particularly to the board, how would you see, or how would you want the board to be comprised? And what kind of, you know, authority would you want the town to have over the composition and membership?
You're asking the select board?
Select board.
Well, we haven't discussed it, so the board can't answer, but individually, we could
Sure.
chime in. I don't, go, you guys wanna?
Well, first of all, I start with trust is a must. And so I would want town oversight, town approval of the concept, however you go about that. And a point of authority in the select board, if I get convinced that that's the right thing to do. But not overbearing. The short story from me.
So would you see there being a crossover member or members of the select board on this committee, or just that you're the appointing body of maybe 1 or 2 members, if not all of them?
You know, maybe for the first 2 or 3 years, because that closes off, allays the negativity and suspicion of, oh my God, there, you know, the library board is fundraising on its own or whatever. But I don't, I'm not wedded to that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think initially, there probably should be a select board member on 501c3 board. But I think it's time, because again, my only concern is that it just starts going in a direction, another direction, a direction we don't want it to go in. And I think if you've got representation on it and you are there to be a part of the initial bylaws, then you can pretty much structure that so that it makes it very difficult for it to go around. And so I think initially we would need a bigger hand, a heavier hand in bylaw approval and appointments, and probably presence. But after a few years of functioning, that can probably be drawn back.
I'd like to see my whole, I gotta back up a little bit. I think the only way this is gonna work is if we all get pulling oars in the same direction here, and I don't feel like we're doing that now. So I would very much like the cross-pollination. I would like a select board member on the board of directors and perhaps 2 members from this committee on that board of directors. So we have this cross-pollination, even though we have 3 different, groups, if you will, entities. We have the select board. We have 3 different entities. We have the select board, we have this group, and a board of directors and a nonprofit. That in itself leads to splintering, I think. And I think the more we can cross-pollinate those groups, the better off, the better chance we have of everybody pulling the oars in the same direction here, which I think is not happening quite candidly yet. And we need to, and I don't want to create something institutionally that's gonna further splinter us.
And this is an option two.
Yeah, I am definitely in favor of option two,
And then
that
a
has
select board and two members or something
something
like
like that. I mean, you know.
To
one-
be the
right,
trustees of
right.
this, and then from there.
Right, and something in the ordinance that allows, that limits the directs or limits the bylaws on certain major decisions, that the only way they can be amended is if it comes back to town meeting. I'm not talking about small micromanagement, but for example, this is totally unrelated, but at a Rockland Golf Course is a nonprofit, and they have a set of bylaws and a board of directors, and the board of directors run the day-to-day operations with staff, of course. But certain big decisions are reserved only for the membership. They have to reconvene, like in a town meeting, not a town meeting, obviously, but in a general meeting. And only those big decisions can be made by that full membership, if you will. And I'd like to see that structure in this entity, because I think we need to do everything we can to I think we need all the magnets pulling together, not pushing. And
And then another question for you, Kristen, in creating the bylaws, I'm on a 501c3 right now, which is very small. And it's for art education in RSU 13 schools. And I wrote the bylaws, but, you know, I wrote it with some legal Zoom help, and I looked at several cases of bylaws, and I wrote it and then took it to our board, and they were approved after some amount of discussion. I would assume we need a little more legal advice on this. This is, I mean, so that's the simplest, form, but it's possible. If you just Google bylaws for nonprofits, you get, a big hit. And so I'm wondering what your recommendation would be on that.
Oh, we would draft the bylaws.
You would draft the
Yeah.
bylaws.
Yeah, and this ordinance is going to say, I mean, if I had my druthers, the ordinance would say that the select board proposes the bylaws and establishes the initial membership of the corporation, essentially the incorporators. And there will have to be an organizational meeting of this corporation, which does the adoption of the bylaws, but that document should by and large be set in stone by the time that organizational meeting is held. And
so when you say we would draft the bylaws, who's we?
we, my firm, on behalf of the town.
As opposed to us collectively? I mean, I would assume the town would, particularly the Board of Selectmen and the views of the committee could be incorporated into that.
Yeah.
At least conceptually.
Well, so I'm envisioning that this committee still exists and I think has a role in whatever ordinance in terms of, interfacing with this corporation, and it's one of the bodies to which the corporation needs to report on some scheduled basis,
Yes.
So, I think the bylaws are going to say the board shall report to the selectmen and the committee on a quarterly basis, any fundraising, goals, successes, full accounting, etc.
And is that board, I think you said this already, but let me just double check, that board, however many members that is, then would they be the ones in charge of establishing committees under, for all the various tasks, setting up databases, fundraising, designs, all that, there'd have to be separate areas of expertise.
Yeah, and they're typically in the bylaws, those committee members don't necessarily have to be members of the board. It's just like the selectmen can appoint this advisory committee. That board could appoint committees to take on certain roles.
So I think that all makes sense. I guess what I'm hearing is maybe a little bit of confusion about exactly how much of this pie of the whole project is being delegated to the corporation versus which remains with the committee. And I think we should just be clear on that. like perhaps use this meeting to become clear on that?
So what I'm hearing is that the corporation would be in charge of fundraising only,
Yeah. That's what
and that everything else would be a partnership between this committee and the select board in terms of planning the project.
Well, I wouldn't say they would exclusively. I mean, I think the town can still fundraise.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea is to have as many avenues open where, because I know, for example, I wouldn't donate to the 501c3. I would donate to the town. That's just my,
But when she said exclusively, she meant the
That's the
role
job.
of the
Right.
501c3 is exclusive.
I know.
That's going
But
to
I
be their
just want to make
exclusive
sure
mission.
that, I just want to make sure that we're all hearing the same thing, because I don't, I kind of heard it the other way. Yeah, that's side.
So there are pieces, I mean, so just hypothetically, there are pieces of that fundraising mission. Say, like producing materials to send to donors and like doing public outreach and like fundraising as an umbrella contains like a fair number of things. And so I think we just, at a certain point, when those bylaws are written or however it gets done, like we need to be clear on, you know, are we establishing a group of people who said like, okay, produce the materials, we'll approve them, like just go out and do it. And we'll work on, you know, the design and the higher level stuff at the committee level, or is it, you know, is it in order to get to the.
I was
to the
just,
structure
yeah, I
that's
was
gonna
thinking
work?
about that too, and I think that part of the bylaws or the mission has to be, you know, to promote the project as envisioned and publicized by this committee. Because, for instance, you know, let's say the nonprofit corporation puts together a glossy brochure for fundraising purposes, and it has a rendering of this, you know, modern, huge building that is nothing like the town can actually afford or wants to have. That could absolutely happen, and that would be terrible.
So I think that's just all I meant to say. There's
I think that's
some
important.
details on how these pieces work together, particularly because this is like the fact that the design piece flows into the fundraising piece, and it has to be effective. Just, yeah, that's all. That was my point, which is to say that a little bit of a more nuanced relationship than just buckets of responsibility.
Yeah, I think that's a critical point, because I mean, this committee is job for the fundraising. I don't want to oversimplify this, but I almost see the 501c3 as a sort of a legal depository.
Yeah.
For lack of a better word. I mean, because I don't think you're going to find another 7 people. We had trouble getting enough people to serve on this committee. Now we're going to go duplicate that and have another committee that, you know, and
I think that's true, but I also don't want to be restrictive in case it is possible to drum up more support for this.
Right. Sure,
like,
right.
People can work together and they have a little bit more of a grassroots organization that could do some stuff. So I think striking the right balance between that freedom to organize and execute, like, and then responsibility to the committee and to the select board is, that just seems like the whole ball. Because it's gonna take, I mean, it's also just gonna take more than the 7 people on this committee to get it done. So, like, that's just a fact. So having a mechanism by which community support can be marshaled is helpful.
well, and that's why I think the temporary library is so critical. I mean, when you look at the tremendous job that's happened down there, all on volunteer basis, we should, in my mind, if we're looking at this over a 50-year horizon, which I am looking at, that energy, we need to marry that energy with this effort, not have it, I'm gonna say it bluntly, not have it be competing with this effort. We need to, we need to take that energy and that goodwill that's being built down there and that spirit of volunteerism and marry that with this committee and the long-term mission.
Yeah,
that's how I feel about it.
Maureen.
Okay, I'm gonna bring up the elephant in the room now. My understanding when I was appointed to this committee was that we were gonna build a library, community center. Guys gave us the paperwork. In the discussion that I've heard, there are people on this committee that are talking more community center with a small library, or the wording's been totally different. So I tried to clarify that. And kind of got labeled as being negative and, you know, uncooperative. The Liz Jenkins thing going.
By whom? I mean,
Just
okay, go ahead.
in the community. The Liz Jenkins thing and going to that building, I mean, that was a great idea. I've been trying to get this community to actually go visit a library. I've kind of gotten slapped down on that. My vision that I understand was we were gonna build a library with a community room in it. I don't think that's what a few people on this committee envision. They want, they're talking about a community center where you can hold town meetings, you can have 300 people.
Yes.
You can do that.
Yes.
Is that what you're thinking?
Yes.
Okay.
But,
And then where's the
but it's-
library gonna be?
but the library is the central center of it. The library is key and central. But all of those community, and I don't want to talk about rooms but the functions that go into that. And that was very clear in the research that we did when we did the Futures Committee, was what the town wants is a place for the library and a functional community center. So the library is key, but the community center is part of it too.
Well,
You've
okay,
gotta
and
have
I get that we do need a community space. the
And a
whole-
place to meet,
Whole thing.
includes a place.
Right. And I think that's why people have been so supportive of, you know, the move to the Guilford Butler, because they were excited about the fact that they could spread out and they could now hold meetings in different rooms and more than one thing could go on, and it's been awesome, and that's why everybody's poured their energy into that. Which is what I told you originally, I was gonna, you know, help get that going, get that done. I do believe that, you know, we can build a new building, which is why I did agree to be on this committee. I just haven't felt like we were going in that direction, I guess. Because 4,500 square feet to me isn't big enough.
Well, I mean, that could change. I mean, that's what was the original recommendation that was developed. I mean, I wouldn't get locked in on it.
And I can also speak a little bit to, and I think this is something we just.
I think Anne might want to speak
Go ahead.
to. Anne, did you want to, did I just catch that?
I wanted to point out that the Guilford Butler Library, if you've been in it since they've opened in the last week, is a booming community center. It's got plenty of books to check out and plenty of book clubs and all of that, but it is already an excellent community center, and I can see more things like the things that Penny has organized and offered being welcomed by the town. So I think a larger space is not a bad idea at all, and I think it would be used. And that's all I have to say on that subject.
That's where I was going, Ann, with that, is that, yes, that's why I agreed to be on this committee, because I can see that in the future. And I'm looking in the future that this town will need a bigger building, because we are growing. So I think that's where the kind of issue is the building and what it comprises.
Just, I would just say a note on.
Gabe, could you just talk a
Sorry,
little
yeah, I
louder?
can try. I've got this mask on, but, and Maureen, I'm sorry if you felt that way. I think what I've been trying to say, we just haven't had those meetings yet, where we hash out like what we believe the building should be and how big it should be. We just haven't had any discussion yet of what, of a design meeting or even a like we haven't just barely not reviewed the results of our initial survey. So I think that absolutely, like the goal of this committee is to keep, like, is to draw in all the voices from the committee and build consensus around what a building that the town is going to use and want and need. and also the building that anticipates future needs for that. And I think, I take a little bit of exception to the idea that anything has been closed down yet. And I do apologize if that's the impression that
And
I'm
so I
given.
felt every single time, so.
And that's, I'm sorry about that, because that's not what we're trying to do. And it's not, we are gonna, the whole plan, the whole series of meetings that are gonna happen where it should be about inclusive understandings of what we hope to do in the future. So those meetings are coming, and I'm sorry that they haven't happened yet. And, that's the goal of the committee.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say, if somebody thinks they are restricted to 4,500 square feet, that was not our intention.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why it says approximately. If you come in with 6,000, let us know, and I don't see where that's out of line. So don't feel you're happen to be restricted to 4,500. It's approximately 4,500. So
And the number came from all,
It did,
talking to all the various departments and
Yeah.
who would be in that building and what it would be used for. That's
That's
where it came from.
exactly.
And what size room to have a town meeting of 80 people in it and so much square footage per person, that's where that came from. And so it's numbers that, were gleaned from those conversations 3 years ago, but it's not, it is approximate, that's for sure.
Well, as I pointed out when I went to the new Rockport Library, just their upper floor is 5,000 square feet. That's just one floor with all what they've got up there. So that's when I looked at it, and 500 square feet, oh God, we won't, what's the square footage of Guilford?
6,000, 10,000.
6,000 on the top level.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and those rooms are pretty big.
Defined by 36, is the size of the current one.
Yeah, but
Yeah, so
there's
that
a lot of,
gives you
there's a
that
lot
gives
of
you a
waste,
better- yeah,
lot of
that gives
wasted
you-
space there though. That double loaded corridor down the middle, that's a huge.
Well, that's our exhibit.
But I'm a visual, I just needed to, 45 didn't mean a thing to me, so I had to go actually look at it. So,
Go look at I think we're getting off track.
no, I
I'd
just
like
wanted
to
to
use
bring that
Kristen,
up as far as.
We
the
can talk
building
about
and
this in our
what we
committee
wanted
meeting.
to talk about. Well, I wanted, while everybody was, I know stuff's been going on.
Where are you guys meeting?
I'd like you to hear.
Well, hopefully you're gonna meet down at
We're
the
gonna
new
need it.
community center.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the perfect, yeah, that's the perfect
Tonight we're gonna
place.
stay here.
No, I
No,
mean,
no, in the future though,
We're gonna-
rather than the Little Red Schoolhouse, probably.
We can
shift
do
it
it
out.
by June. Nice, right? So that's why we've been meeting at the library. Okay, Maura, go.
I think this has been a really good conversation because part of the first meeting, we said we needed a survey to find out what the inner space needed to be. And part of those discussions, when the first three people did the setup for the survey, Maureen said, we're just building a library, not doing a community center. We had that discussion and Gabe said, no, it's half. And but that started probably the there were certain people that thought only a library and there was other people that said it's both. And I don't know what was told Selectboard to the different people. I knew but I think tonight's conversation by the three of you has been crystal clear. And I think that everyone needed to hear that because we weren't on the same page from day one. Because people heard different things and probably in retrospect, we should have had the three of you at the first meeting saying, this is the direction that this committee needs to go through. So everybody heard it from the select board. And so I'm really glad to hear it tonight. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? Has everybody read this in detail?
Yes.
Okay, all right, because it sounds like people, on it. And that's what the town approved, the recommendations of the Guilford.
Well, in addition to the report, I would encourage people that are interested in this to review the presentation, all the visits Sandy did with the 7 other towns that preceded us in this journey. And just to show you how circumstances may change, if you plan for 80 at town meeting, it's funny, 2 years ago, we had over 90 people at our town meeting, and last year we had over 100. So something may be changing
Right.
that may change that requirement.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Up until this point, where does the money come from that's brought up?
For the current interim library, are you talking to?
Would you identify yourself?
I'm a landowner.
So
What is your question?
what is funding the library?
What has funded it up to this point? What has the
The
money-
operations of the existing library over the years or the relocation?
Just the relocation.
Mainly fundraising, and the town has contributed.
$1,105
But we have some more.
20,000
Right,
for
but we have some more expenses coming in,
Yeah.
so not a great deal, but most of it will come from fundraising.
Donations.
Donation.
And then,
But there is an operating budget for the library that comes out of the town that your tax dollars pay.
And has been for years.
Which would be heat,
And it's also-
heat, electricity and all that. And books,
And
yeah.
books.
Books, yeah, library.
Sandra? Just one little addition to what Walter said. I asked Bill at town office how many people were at the last town meeting, and he said 136 voted. That's just the people who voted. When you add the other people present, we were close to 150. So that might need to be in the calculations for the size of the room we need to be able to meet together.
I think we should finish with Kristen. And in terms of any other questions that are legal and have to do with, no, I said that incorrectly. The questions are all legal. Anything having to do with legal issues about a nonprofit or a structure or moving forward on any of those issues?
Yes, I have. My question is, sorry, it's still not strictly just for you, but in terms of how we get to a structure, is that something that this committee, who wants to draft it? Who wants to propose?
So when you say structure, you're not talking about a building.
No. Organizational structure for the. We might both be.
Well, I
Who
would
has to
suggest,
draft the ordinance?
I would suggest that people put their ideas in writing and we collate them. Anybody who's interested in putting their ideas, that's just my suggestion.
Yeah, and I would go the other way. I think that our attorney is ready to start us off. Did I understand?
Yeah, I mean, there are some major questions that I think, I would need guidance on, and then I'd work from there. For instance, number of board members, how many select board members are going to seat it, how other people are chosen for that board, et cetera. But I think what I could do is get some samples of other similar corporations, and maybe circulate a draft along with those samples, and people could look at them, and then maybe another meeting to go over that and brainstorm some options within that.
So
It always helps to start with a document.
Right,
And
that's,
work from there.
so draft ordinance?
So I would draft an ordinance and I would draft bylaws.
I would prefer to go the opposite. And because I have a feeling once there's a draft, people tend to migrate to that draft and not really noodle it through.
I think it would be great to look at an ordinance or two or three, just to see how they sound and how they read, and then we can put our ideas into it.
Because there are a lot of us that are also visual in that respect, and I feel that if I had some words in front of me, I could be pondering and then questioning, research, and then write my questions for clarification and or additions or omissions. So I'm hoping that a lot of people feel the same way.
So how about this? I mean, bylaws by and large all have the same basic components.
Right.
So what I would suggest is I draft that structure, and where there are big picture questions, I will have comments with some options. And then also, if everybody can see some samples of what a whole document might look like and some other situation that might help.
But there's two, the ordinance is one thing, the bylaws.
Right.
isn't. So ordinance comes first or the bylaws come first?
The ordinance will come first.
The bylaws would trail from the.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I still may just take the personal opportunity to draft some things on paper because that's just the way I work better when I write stuff, so. If no one else is interested.
Yeah. I mean, anyone, we can all do that.
Yeah, well, that's what I was suggesting, that
Yeah, but
anybody
I
do
think,
that. It helps me think it through when I
Can we
write.
get
you
it,
know,
can we get a
because
due date for that?
Yeah, time is of the, you know.
We got 5 years.
Not if we don't start fundraising, it will be 6 years.
Does this group have like a Google Drive or something that you might use to upload things? I could create a Google Drive and share what I drafted to that, and then if anybody had interesting things they wanted to add to it too, we could do that.
Good idea.
We can just provide, we don't have a collective Google Drive, we can share the contacts for who should be shared on.
Yeah, if somebody could get that to me somehow through Terry,
Yep.
that would be good.
Can do.
Well, let's talk about the timeline a little. I mean, if we're talking about an ordinance, we have a town meeting coming up in a very short timeline. June 21st.
Open town meeting this year?
Yeah, well, hopefully, unless the world crashes again. But we got stuff go to the printers and blah, blah, blah.
I need to have the printer no later than May 15th.
Now, it wouldn't have to be in the town report, but I would
No.
like it to.
Couldn't you have a special town meeting further
Good.
down the road? Because I
Good.
think that's too quick to crunch everything. I would agree with that.
You could, but I would much prefer to bring this matter because there's been so much controversy. I'd much prefer to bring it to the annual town meeting.
But the town would need to vote on the ordinance for sure. And the ordinance could authorize the select board to approve the bylaws.
That's what I'm
The
thinking.
bylaws is a more intensive
Yeah, and
document.
the,
Somebody repeat that.
the ordinance is going to be very basic. It's going to be, there shall be a corporation that is formed in this way. And the select board, I mean, I would rather the ordinance have some basic parameters for the bylaws.
Yeah.
But that the bylaws should be improved, informed by the select board before the organizational meeting, that sort of thing. I think it's going to be pretty scant. And so I think we can get that part done in time to get it.
I'm not suggesting we can't. I'm just saying we got, I mean, that's not the only thing we're working on. So there's a, you know, all I'm saying is we're under the gun time-wise. That's all I'm saying.
I think we can get that done in a month if people are committed to not blowing things up beyond where they need to be.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to work on that or respond to that or however you need us to be involved.
Yeah, this committee can, we meet monthly, but we can convene a meeting if needed to review that.
Well, I think we as a board would need to authorize Kristen to do this.
I move to authorize Kristen to draft the ordinance governing the formation of the fundraising committee with its 501c3 status.
And give, okay, I'll second that.
So we're only talking the ordinance at this point?
Well, that's what I was gonna add is,
Okay.
and authorize her to research other bylaws and start working on those.
Get that, Terry?
Yeah.
Make sure you get 3 starts.
I think it's gonna be good that it's recorded.
What's important is, did Kristen get it?
I got it.
Yeah, right. You can send it to me then.
Okay.
To draft the ordinance and to begin work on the bylaws.
Right.
Okay. Discussion? I have a discussion. How much is this gonna cost us? Do you have any estimate at all?
Let me think.
Because I just did a forecast on how much we were gonna spend in legal fees for the next 3 months, and I didn't include this.
Well, it's gonna take, it's all gonna be done within the next 3 months. So there's that. These things are very much driven by meetings. So if I'm going to come up, for instance, to another workshop meeting like this, that's, 5 hours of time. If the group is going to meet independently and maybe not need me in the room and get me some feedback through one, point of contact, then that's going to cut things down a lot. So I think the structure of how you all want to do all of this kind of drives that.
And I assume Zoom, if you Zoom in, it's cheaper?
2 hours travel time saved.
So do we want to put an up to amount on this? Or do you guys just want to leave it?
I'm not concerned.
Okay.
We've only spent $555 on legal fees in the general budget anyway, and out of 9,000.
I would see
How
that.
should not-
Yeah, I mean,
Don't
20
bill us to the balance.
even attending a 3-4 hour meeting, I think still only gets us to $2,500.
We just don't have to for next year.
Yeah, but this is this year.
Okay. Further discussion? How come I'm the most frugal person up here and I'm supposed to be the liberal Democrat? Further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
I move that we go into executive session pursuant to MSRA. Ooh,
And
I
our
only
committee
know the
will,
personnel one.
405-60.
460, 405-60.
and our committee will stay here for another 10 minutes.
Well, we got to vote.
Second.
So, second, all those in favor?
Aye.
And we're gonna meet in the town office in executive session. And Carrie, you're gonna join us.
Thank you. Thank you, Chrissy.
Yeah, nice to meet everyone.
Drive it up here.
What?
On the other side of us.
I have to be You guys need that before done. Just everything. Take care of it. Yes, they go to the office.
That way you're, they are about.
It's all about the hearing. You volunteered for a hard day. So then we can volunteer. Probably should say it first in case there's some difference between hearing.
I know. So that was 7:30 days.
It's just right there.
Some of the next meetings. Yeah.
Well, that's great. That's even better.
Okay, we have a couple items of business.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Join in.
Join in. Comments?
That's like a part of our meeting. Any public comment? Items not on the agenda. Anybody?
Anybody want to say anything?
Your literal seat at the table. Okay, here's nothing. We just, Kelly has some.
Yes, I have two items of business that I want to, we need to approve the minutes from March 2nd. I had the wrong date, but it's March 2nd. And I think all the corrections have been made. No, still more corrections? Okay. Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I put them in, but they apparently didn't get caught. Under public attendees, Liz Jenkins, who our guest speakers, is part of the public, so she should
Yeah.
be there.
I actually think this, but go through it to.
But the corrected one I received, the last one on March 16th didn't have it.
Okay, so let me just check this.
Because I double checked tonight if I had missed something.
Not a problem.
And then Merle Rockwell was also on the public, because her name was up there.
Is it any?
Well, she was
sitting here.
No, on our meeting, both Ed and Merle were on.
They were on Zoom at that meeting. Okay, so that's MERLE?
Yes,
Yep.
Rockwell.
Rockwell, just like.
And then there was Palmer, and I don't know who Palmer is. And it was in, so I have no idea, but it was on Zoom as well. And then when I looked at the new ones, you still just had L throughout this segment about Jenkins. You forgot her surname. It just had L all through. And no-
See, okay, because I corrected that, so somehow or other you got the wrong copy, and I will make sure that you get the right one.
And that was, and, because I got the one where you had your little pyramid in the triangle, which was great.
Yeah, I saw that, I thought that was great.
Yeah, that was the only ones that I saw. Thank you.
Okay, so do we have a motion to
I'll move.
accept the minutes as
I move to accept the minutes for March 7th as amended.
Second.
Thank you. Is Ann here? There's Ann. So
Yes.
all the-
Yes.
Oh. Yes, okay. Okay, Maureen. Here.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
We can just
Marcia.
raise our hand when
Yeah,
we're
I know.
physical. You just have to take
Just
her.
for her.
Yeah, because she's
Okay.
on Zoom. I've been
The
doing that.
Zoom thing, I'm still really fuzzy about. Okay, so the minutes have been accepted. Thank you very much. They'll get sent to Terry and she'll post them in the, on the website. All right, so the survey is the next item of business and I've tallied some things and I've also surveyed it does its own tallying, as some of you know. And so
You haven't collected those from the library.
you still have some at the library. Okay. All right, we're gonna talk about extending the deadline a little bit too. There's nothing final here. So far, I have 31 surveys on Survey Planet and 15 hard copies in my possession. And so the way that Survey Planet does, it's all, percentages. 5% of people voted for this and, like that. Whereas for these, I tallied myself. That was very interesting because I just looked, I did all the tallying, but I looked at the top five or six. Can you hear me, guys? Sort of the top 5 or 6 that people were in each question, the community center and the library. And it seems that, it's very interesting, for the library question, children's room, story time, reading room, reading spaces, visiting authors and illustrators were high on the list of things that people were wanting to see happen. There were lots of things that you're already doing that were still in the list. For the community center space, town meeting was the highest one in both the online survey and in the paper survey. Exercise class, group meeting spaces, senior lunches, emergency shelter, and speakers of various kinds were also in the community center. But for lots of people who checked a lot of things. And so I think that's a really interesting piece of information. It is a small sample. That's my main concern. And so my question is, what do we want to do? Do we want to extend the deadline? Do we want to make a more concerted effort to do some canvassing in different parts of the town? What do you want to weigh in on this?
I mean, also just thinking that in 2 months, it is the annual town meeting, and maybe rather than reporting at the town meeting, you use the town meeting as an opportunity to get more input. Because it's,
probably. We've done this before.
Yeah.
We have survey results from the first survey.
But I think
We have the physical history of the library and what we're doing now, what we were doing then. That's all part of this. You know, I don't think that the library community, the community library, basically what you need to call this, is to be recreated by this committee.
Repeat that. You don't want.
I don't think that the existing structure is to be recreated by this committee. I think it needs to be taken into consideration what our needs are now and where we would like to go with this. I think the point between library and community center is that they are one entity and they should be considered one entity and governed by one entity, the town, and not two separate things. 2/5 of that existing 6,000 square feet are devoted to books. The rest of it is community space, but those are functions of the library, not community center in its separateness. This is all one entity.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that. I mean,
Could you
obviously.
speak up just a little? I'm sorry.
Sorry, I'm just quiet. That's a flaw. But I think what I understand is that this committee decided to create this survey as one more way of gaining access to an understanding of not just what the town has, but what the town wants. And Penny, that obviously we know and we appreciate that basically no one has a better understanding of what the town has and what the town wants from the library than you do. And that's why, you know, that's why you're here. So as we go through the process of deciding what this committee wants to recommend as a new facility, survey is one piece, everyone's individual experience is another piece, and then your contribution as with that understanding that you have of what the town currently does and what the town wants and how everything works is an extremely important piece of that puzzle as well. So we're not trying to supplant anything or create anything from whole cloth, but rather just like get as much information as we can, as much good information as we can, and get it all. That's what I hope for. That's what I hope everyone understands.
Thank you.
But that's, yeah.
Yes, Catherine.
So I think the issue might be bridge, you know, what Penny envisioned as an enlarged library concept, you know, including community activities. But what I fear has been lost, and I didn't hear about it all tonight, was the old Grange concept of community where people actually gathered and shared meals, which involved having some section. And that would be the lower part of the Rockport Library, for instance. So that's what they see also as a community place where they can have, you know, other meetings, including not just literary or physical movement or whatever, but also shared meals. So I think that's an important element that people clearly said they were missing and that not, you know, ought to be included.
Yeah.
I would like to point out that Penny is beginning to do this. There's going to be a soup on Wednesday for anybody who wants to come in for lunch. Saturday morning, there's coffee and cake. And many libraries do have kitchens. And for these various reasons. And I think we should consider that when we do planning. And that would sort of bridge this gap that I think you're seeing. And I think, yeah, I think we can do it all as really one large thing.
Yeah, thank you, Anne.
You're welcome.
I would what Ann says, and just in the, again, in libraries, I have visited quite a lot of libraries. I would never use Searsmont as my goal. They have a huge community room downstairs, which feels like you've gone to another country. Library, and more community things going on within the library, which is actually a very beautiful library. I don't know how the square footage of that, to your point, but that's one model. I just thought, oh my God, why did they do that? And they rent that space out, for parties and things like that, but it's not being used well enough for the kinds of things that you're starting to do with Soup Fridays, or I forget the dates, Fridays, that you're doing, and all the welcoming stuff, that's really important, I think. But I do, I also, why I'm saying that is when we did the Guilford Butler Futures, there was a talk of a space enough for town meeting. Now, this is a matter of design more than anything. I think ways of dividing that up for smaller meeting spaces or other kinds of community activities, like a game area, or, that's all in how it gets designed. So it's not like, I guess the one question I would have for you, Penny, is are you feeling that it's too much? There's like too much organization or
No.
management, or
Absolutely not.
Okay.
It is a volunteer-run library. It is a community-run community center. And to say that it can't be managed by what exists now is wrong. We're a town of 1,600. We're not going to be paying a manager to oversee what happens. This is homegrown. It's starting because this one wants to serve coffee, that one wants to serve soup. Yes, come on, and I will help you find a good time to do this in this building that you own. But to be told that this can't be done at the level where we have been funding it is very discouraging to me. I think you will see as things go on here, that building's going to be hopping all the time. The first survey that was done, and those results still haven't been brought to this committee, was regarding that building, and certainly the ability to rent out the lower level, to use the kitchen, to have large gatherings. That basically has a capacity of 315 people, was an important part of that first survey. But those survey results were not taken into consideration when the Futures Committee made its recommendation.
I'm not gonna, are we gonna get into Paul DiMaggio? Because I don't want to do that. Because I don't need to go.
No, I'm talking about the first survey results.
Yeah, no,
They haven't been brought to this committee. They had nothing to do with Paul DiMaggio.
And we also, I think it's not this committee's business, nor is it this committee's mission to insinuate anything about what can or cannot be done with any level of community funding. Like, that's not what we're doing.
Well, that's not what I'm hearing.
That's not what we wanted. And like I said, we don't know, I don't know. You know way better than we know. So I understand that.
I've had it come at me from several directions that, well, you can't do this as an all-volunteer library. You can't run the community center.
I've never heard that, actually.
Yeah, well, I think we'll do what we can to keep that type of language out of the.
Well, I just heard you say, you think you can manage all this. I've heard it from various people in this room, and that.
My question was, when we publish these surveys, when we look at them, the answer shouldn't be, oh, that, we can't do all of that, but the
That's
answer
not
is,
what I said.
well, that's the way I was asking it. I want to make sure that we're not overloading you at this point by getting all this information.
half of the stuff's happening now.
I know, that's why I'm applauding you for that. And I'm also have said publicly many times, a library is the one free space in any town, except maybe a school, which you can't go into so much anymore, but it is the free space for people to gather, to read, to listen, to talk, to play, to do exercise, all the things that can go on in a, a really wonderful hybrid library community center space. I've never said anything other than that. So I just wanted to double check with you if I was misreading what you were saying. So that's all. I'm not.
Go ahead.
Sandra.
I got a chance to see the library for the first time at Guilford Butler this week, and I think you've done a marvelous job, and it's wonderful space. It's going to work wonderfully for small to medium-sized groups. Conservation Commission is hoping to have lecturers, and it could certainly accommodate 25 to 30 people, maybe more. But
I believe our capacity is, what, 35, what we did in the size room?
Yeah, it depends. I would have to see your fire marshal permit to know.
But anyway, for a lot of things that we'd like to do, it's lovely space. But I'd like to be able to have a town meeting, and I think we need a room that will accommodate up to 200. People can tell me a different number, but I think it's got to be at least something like that. I've come from places where you had a room like that, that you had community dances, square dances, swing dances, international dancing. You're not going to do that with Guilford Butler Library.
I'd like it on the lower level.
I don't want to go to the lower level because I've only seen pictures of it. We're not allowed in the space. But that doesn't feel like a space that brings joy to be in. The upstairs in Guilford Butler absolutely does that right now. But I want a space that's got, all high ceilings and windows and,
And what did this committee fail to achieve its goal?
What I wanted to say, our goal is to fundraise and plan a building. We heard it from the select board, and that's what we should be doing. We shouldn't be going in another tangent saying, no, we don't want to do this or do that. We gotta.
But there is an amendment to that article.
I think Marcia wants to.
Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
And then you can also.
Yeah.
My point is, the one thing I feel we don't have in this town that I long for is a big welcoming space, whether it is used as a basketball gym part of the time, a dance hall part of the time, and a town meeting, and a place for community dinners that has a good modern kitchen connected to it. That's the piece I feel I don't find anywhere in this town. A place where a whole lot of us could get together for an important town purpose or to have a good time. That's the one big piece I don't think we can have without building it.
Marcia.
And that was my point when I said no, that I was not committed to building a new building. I think we have a structure that's very usable and could be made very attractive with a small amount of money. And build on the back a space that's big enough for community, maybe a track, town hall dances, rent the space out. I don't want to be limited to we have to tear down and build completely new. And that's why I said no, and I think that shocked them, but I'm sorry.
Well, I think we might want to devote an entire evening to really looking at alignment and really looking at goals before we,
And I
as
think, yes, I think that will probably be our next meeting.
and I think the other item of business business that some of us will have to work on is this ordinance before town meeting. So I think the May meeting, I would, in terms of the survey, I would suggest that we extend the deadline, that we look at other ways of getting more information. And I don't know if anybody's available. You're going to be gone, Moira. So maybe May is really the next logical piece of.
We'll be back at the end of April. I have no problem with canvassing, but I think going to the town meeting and having the surveys there is a great idea because it just didn't get out there when I asked people.
I think they need to be simpler too. There were so many things.
Yes, a lot of people said it was too clunky, I think, and,
Yeah.
you know, we talked about that, we went both ways on that one, and this is what,
Oh, Sally.
I agree. It's a good idea to put it out at town meeting. You just put something in people's hands, they're likely to respond.
But Sally.
Sally, I think you were muted.
You muted?
Oh, I don't think so.
No,
Sally.
but we're looking at Sally Merchant.
Got it. Okay. Now can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. On the surveys, would it be possible to put copies in the store and the post offices
Yes.
with a sign?
Post office won't allow
They won't do
that.
that.
Copies in the store?
You can put them on the
Historical Society?
in Spruce Head.
They
have
only
a-
meet
Oh,
once.
I was talking about places where people go without going there on purpose to find the survey. Like people might not stop at the town office, but they might be in the gig store or the post offices.
You can't put them in the post office, but in Spruce Head, they have a public bulletin board outside and you can put it on there, but it can't be in the post office.
How about including it in with the annual town report? Because that's mailed to every household, so, you know, you would be sure it would be in everybody's hand.
Okay, so we'll look into that.
Right, we were just hoping it was gonna be done before that, but
Yeah.
that's a good scenario too.
I've tried to get in the school a couple of times. They just recently went to where you can go in. Then I called the offices and they said, we can't make that decision. I mean, the high school is willing to get the surveys to the high school kids from South Thomaston. But she said, I need approval by the principal, which I've emailed him twice now and he's not responded. And then I talked to the office at the middle school and she said, you have to talk to the superintendent. I emailed the superintendent and he was on medical leave. And then finally he did get back to me and he said, I'll let the principals know that you want to get it. And I'll have them get in touch with you. And I haven't. April vacation, but I will try again right after April vacation. So it was kind of a running around. I don't think we'll be able to do Ashland. So, but the high school and the middle school kids in the survey. All right.
What if we stood outside near the buses and as the kids came out?
Yeah, that's fine, but I think you still need permission.
Oh, that's true, it's one on school property.
Yeah.
That might get you a wreck.
Yeah, you should
Yeah.
But then you get in the news and you say, well, I was trying to distribute the survey.
And they would try to send them back to me in airplanes.
See the text you can't share.
All right, so I think next steps
We'll
are.
have to start it out.
I know you do.
I think that's,
That's
unless
it.
there's any more public comment, I think that concludes the meeting. I think the big deal is, getting on board with the ordinance for the select board and the 501c3, and then having a further discussion of just mission alignment of what everybody thinks, like just getting on the same page next meeting.
I do have one question.
Go ahead.
Anne had mentioned last meeting that she didn't like Wednesdays, so this might be a good time to decide what people feel on what's a better night to meet.
Did I
know
say
you-
that?
You did. If you don't want to change, that's fine. I just asked.
No, I don't in particular. I think it was just a particular Wednesday, perhaps.
Cool.
And I think because of Penny being at the library, we need to meet at the library. So is that okay? Penny?
It will be once we have the broadband moved over. We do not yet. Hopefully it will be by the May meeting, but that is up in the air.
Well, then we'll check with you.
If there needed to be a Zoom capability. Anne, are you available for the May meeting?
Yeah.
Would be in person?
What's the date?
Idea.
Let me get my.
May 4th.
May. I don't think so, guys. I think I'm not going to start being really available until June locally.
For all the meetings, you need to be available.
So we would have to meet somewhere with.
Can we meet?
I mean, in person. I can Zoom in for anything, but
Yeah.
Broadband for the Zoom.
We'll just keep in touch about that.
Yeah, okay. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn the meeting.
Okay, we're adjourned.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all very much.
This was really good, yeah, very good.
Here.
No,
Are you gonna let us know where we're gonna-
Yeah.
Are you guys gonna let us know? Sandy, Gabe, are you gonna let us know where?
There'll be a